Hello everyone and welcome to another video, and we're continuing with our series of the monster books from throughout all the different D20 and tabletop RPG games. And of course we're starting with of course Dungeons and Dragons. Well, today we move into second edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and here we have the Monstrous Manual. Now, although I started with the original Dungeons and Dragons series, I would say the majority of my gaming was done in second edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So we'll go ahead and get this book open and we'll take a look at the various creatures and monsters that you can encounter in a campaign in Dungeons and Dragons, and I'll cover the ones that I most commonly used. So as you first open the book, here we have an image of the cover art, which I think is absolutely fantastic. I'm going to see down in the comment section down below if you can name all the creatures here represented in the cover art. All right, and here we have a rundown of how to use the book, the contents, what they mean, all the people involved in the book, all the credits, project coordinator, their editor, all that. Of course, one of my favorite artists for the covers of all time, Mr. Jeff Easley. And of course, we have a multitude of other great artists. Tony Terlizzi, we have Jeff Butler, David Simmons, Tom Baxa, Mark Nielsen. I didn't really go over the artists for the other book, but maybe I should start going through the artists, since we are seeing images of these wonderful creatures. I think maybe giving credit to the artists would be a good idea. Contents, other worlds, the monsters, treasure, alignment, all the various things that relate to the creatures. And now we get into the creatures themselves. Here we have the Aarakocra, which I have used at various points. Some of these monsters are going to be repeats of the ones from the previous books, as some of these are carried over because they're just popular monsters, while others maybe not. So, but either way, for the monsters we have seen in previous books, we'll get to see the evolution of these monsters throughout the different books and even from various games. Again, I'm not going to name every creature, but I am going to turn through the various pages so we can kind of see the monsters as we go. The Aboleth, the Ankeg. I never really used either of the Arcane or the Argus. The Arumvarax. Of course, Batazu is very commonly used. So using different devils. Banshee. Here we have some cool art for the Pit Fiend and for the Abishai. Basilisks. Bats and bears. And here you have your various bears. Your black, your brown, your cave, and your polar bear. Giant beetles, bombardier, the boring, the fire, the rhinoceros, stag, and water. Beholder and their kin. And here's a pretty cool image of some of the various beholder kin that you can encounter. And again, we have a little bit of a subchart with creating different types of beholders, such as the bodies, the central eye, the eye stalks, depending on how much hit points they have and all that. Another list of beholderkin with a cool image. Birds. Of course, birds, and having various types of them in the game is always nice to have. Of your just standard everyday creatures, not just your exotic or mythological type creatures, but having, creatures that you run to on a regular basis. The bullet, which we've seen previously, along with the bugbear. Bullywug, carrion crawler, both classics. Cats and their various subtypes. Of course, we mentioned the Catoblepas before, but here we have an interesting version of that, in my opinion. I think it looks pretty cool. Kind of an ugly, hideous type creature, which I think they rightfully should be. Even their name seems it would suggest that, in my opinion. Centipedes, chimera, cloaker. I always thought that was kind of a interesting looking thing. Cockatrice, Huatl, crabmen. I think look pretty intimidating. I think to run into something like that in real life would be pretty crazy. Crawling hands, crocodiles, giant crustaceans, cryptings. And here again we have an iteration of the Death Knight, which we can see is quite a bit more elaborated upon the entire look of the Death Knight, their classic look, which we've kind of seen up until this point, versus the kind of the smaller black and white image that we got, which was just basically a representation of the creature, of not necessarily a detailed illustration that was found in the Fiend Folio. Splacer Beast is also a classic. Doppelgangers, Dracoliches, all classic creatures. Of course, now here we are getting into dragons. Dungeons and Dragons, I mean, it's in the name, so I mean, if you played D&D and you never, especially for any amount of time, and you never run into a dragon, you never encounter a dragon, I personally think there's something horribly wrong with that. Maybe you feel different. The gem dragons, which I'm glad to see got a representation in this book. So in addition to your chromatics and your metallics, you also have your gems, which I really like. The topaz dragon. And of course you have your various subcharts for your different age groups and different sizes for each dragon. And then of course you have your brown dragon, and then you have kind of like an elemental style dragon. Even though the chromatic dragons are elementally based, I like the elemental type names of like the cloud dragon, deep Mercury. One of my favorites to use is the shadow dragon, especially if you have adventurers campaigning through a place of really low light or lack of sun. Of course, your steel dragon, which for me is kind of like kind of the same concept as using steel in Dragonlance versus using gold. Yellow dragon. So they really elaborated on the dragons in this book, which I really like. Dragonettes, which I guess is your dragonkin, not true dragons. Dryads. Of course, what would Dungeons and Dragons be without dwarves? Or even their cousins like the Dirdo and the Duergar. Alright, now we're getting into elementals. And again, it's even though it's pretty simplistic in the artwork, I really like the artwork, and I think they did a good job of representing the creatures in this, for the most part. There are some that I look at in this book and I'm like, okay. I mean, I get where they're going. Elves, of course, being right there with dwarves, being a basic part of Dungeons and Dragons, or any creature book from any style game, in my opinion, that has this type of campaign setting. Of course, your drow. I love running campaigns with drow involvement. They always seem to be quite satisfying, and tend to create settings that are just as dreary and eerie and as the drow themselves. Make sure I'm not skipping any pages here. Frogs, sharks. Of course, you got to have fungus. What kind of a D&D adventure would it be without fungus? Gargantua. Cloud giants and giant cyclops are always classic monsters. Here we're starting to see a little bit of difference in some of the giants. In my opinion, as far as I remember, this is the first time we see a desert giant. Like, here's a good example of what I was talking about. I think the artwork for the Furbolg works pretty good. However, I think the artwork for the fire giant, while it's effective in depicting what it's supposed to, for some reason I don't think it's as convincing as the Furbolg art. And here we also see the fog giant, which I don't remember seeing a fog giant in any of the monster books before this one. If there is, let me know. I would love to check it out and find out where it is. Same with the jungle giant here. I don't remember seeing that in any of the previous monster books before this one. That's also to be said with the reef giant. So out of the giants, which we just passed through, which ones are your favorite to use, and which ones have you had the most fun incorporating into a campaign? I know for me, both using the GIF and the Gith have been interesting to use in campaigns. The Gith pirates, the Gith Yankee and the Gith Zerai, both classic creatures, which we did cover in the previous book, which was the Fiend Folio. The Gnoll. Gnolls are, in my opinion, a very integral part of any D&D campaign. I've used them quite extensively myself. Same with gnomes. Same with goblins. And here's another example of the artwork. You can tell this art piece right here is quite a bit more detailed and quite a bit better executed than the one for the goblin, unfortunately. But they tried. I'll give them an E for effort on that one. Various golems. And I've always been a fan of golems. I like using golems in campaigns because they're so versatile, especially when they're made from so many different things. You can kind of place them wherever. I've always thought this Necrophidius and the Scarecrow are pretty crazy golems. For some reason, the Scarecrow to me seems more scary than the Necrophidius, even though, the Scarecrow looks a little bit on the jesterish side. I just think it's more creepy in general. More classic creatures. You can see we went into the Gremlins. How many of you remember that movie? Grimlock. Kind of reminded me of the Dinobot Grimlock from Transformers, if anybody remembers that.